All right, so welcome to learning more about education. A aspect of what we're looking at with this activity or this video here is to look more into how to assess student understanding. Namely, on this one, we're going to look at a project that I used to do with my advanced math students, pre-calculus students, algebra 2 students, in how this particular project helped them not only better develop their understanding of the material, but also gave me a great deal of insight into their understanding of the material. And what was really always so interesting and so rewarding on this particular project was when we were done with this project, the scores on the summative assessment for this unit were always really remarkably good. I actually got comments from time to time like, shouldn't you made the test harder? Look at all these good grades. And I was like, well, I did a project, and this project was really spot on with what needed to be done and how that well the students understood the material. So I never had a student complete this particular project and not really completely understand the mathematical topic that was involved. All right, so that's just kind of a background about that. So this particular project also took me a number of iterations to kind of really get right. And the seed for this one was actually a teacher in-service day. The day ended early. I went home. I was watching TV, and Resident Evil movie came on, one of those zombie apocalypse type movies, you know. And the thing that popped in my head was this idea of what does this growth factor really look like? And I think someone actually did the math one time a while back, a few years ago, on other creatures that people have made up over the years, and mathematically showed that if these creatures really existed and acted the way they do in the movies, that the entire population of the world would be completely consumed with whatever that monster was in a matter of days, as opposed to just kind of continuing to go unnoticed or unknown. So it's really kind of interesting. So anyway, so the idea, the place this started was this idea of monsters, but my wife said, so you can see the title at the top there, it says End of the World, right? So my wife told me that topic in particular was a little dark and sinister, so I renamed it the Critter Experiment, and I'll leave both those titles there because it's an interesting discussion with educators to talk about, well, how do we approach this? And sure enough, when I had this idea of the Critter Experiment rather than the End of the World, the first time I did it, I called it the End of the World, and everybody did monsters. The next time I did it, when I did the Critter Experiment, I had a whole slew of students, most of them actually, that did some other type of little creature of some sort. Everything from something resembling a badger to things that were teddy bears to a monster or two. But it gave a lot more diversity in what students decided to do. Now, the project itself isn't necessarily directly world applicable, because the students are creating a species. I'm going to kind of run through the rubric here, and that's what I have in front of you. The top left corner of the rubric says each species created 3 max 10 points each, is what that works out to be, meaning the students can choose to create 3 separate species, and that was the preliminary aspect of the project, is they had to create a creature of some sort, a new creature that didn't exist before. They couldn't create unicorns or vampires or zombies or something like that. They had to create a whole new creature that had never existed before. And that was the primary aspect of this. Now, the reason I did that is partially because the first time I did this, almost everybody did vampires or zombies. So there was very little creativity, so I graded, 100 different projects about vampires and zombies, and it was a little much, right? And it also kind of missed the mark on what I was really trying to get after, which was a real world application of what we're doing with this. So another piece of this is that I would go through, and before I even introduce this project, I would pull up a website that is the World Population Clock. And the World Population clock, or various other forms of it. There are a couple different ones you can use, and the U.S. Census has one. There's one called Worldometer, which is kind of a neat one, and the idea is that it has real-time counts of what's going on in the population, so you can kind of get a sense of where we are in the world right now based upon that, and it goes through different countries as well. The U.S. Census one does something similar, but the numbers are a little different. And that's useful, and I go through that discussion with the students and talking about how here's a model that was made in 1998. And the mathematical model that predicted the populations. And here's what the population is right now, and here's what the model predicted the population to be. And we talk about how there's a disconnect between those two pieces, and why is there a disconnect between those two pieces? And then we look at a couple other species, like the deer population in Louisiana, that has no predators whatsoever. There's nothing left in Louisiana that naturally eats or hunts and eats the deer except humans. So if you were to outlaw or end hunting in Louisiana, the deer population would actually grow beyond its capable sustainable factor or population very quickly, just within a season or two, and become extremely unhealthy and die away within about 4 or 5 seasons. So the human population is actually, and it's a self-made problem, I'm not denying that, but it's the human population actually keeps the deer population in check in that area. Most ecosystems actually reach an equilibrium rather quickly, unless a new species is introduced. Another piece that I look at with the students is the fact that the pythons, or is it the boas, I forget which it is, in the Florida Everglades, they're not native to that area, but they grow and grow and grow and populate the area, and they kill deer and they kill alligators and they kill everything else that's in the space, and they're destroying the ecosystem because they don't belong there. So then I move into this one where a student can opt out of doing a self-created species and choose a species in a real ecosystem, or reintroduce a species to an ecosystem that it's not supposed to be in, and look at what the timeline would work. I let them create their own species because it makes the project a lot more attainable for most of the students. They don't have to actually go out and find the data. What they do here is they create the data. And you say, well, that's not real world applicable. The goal here on this particular project was to get the students working with exponential and logarithmic growth models. So the numbers themselves were kind of inconsequential to the fact that I need them to be able to work effectively and efficiently and understand the models themselves. So the data didn't matter. So they create their own species, they create their own data to go along with it. And then I started creating other aspects of this. What I did is I met with an art teacher and a science teacher and a reading teacher and all these different people in my building at the time, and I started talking to them about what this would look like. And we came across, or we built this project kind of collectively with their help. I even reached out to the theater teacher in my building and talked a little bit about that, because we had I was in an art school, and we had a lot of students who were big into performances and different arts aspects of things. But what I found is that even when I moved away from that art school, the non-artistic students really bought into, and I put that in quotes, right? So the non-artistic students really bought into these performances and these news stories and these other creative aspects of things. Like when I said you need to create your species, which includes a drawing, all the students bought into that, which is another way the students highly engaged in the project itself. It was theirs, it wasn't mine. I wasn't handing them something to work with. They were creating it from the ground up. So all those different boxes are the result of different pieces, and I required 3 boxes. So second row, the equation 2 for species 1, the time prediction for critical mass and the max population for species 1, and then the time prediction to extinction for species 1. Those 40 points were required. Now you may say equation 2 for species 1. I think that's actually supposed to be equation for species 1, or 2 equations, if you will, for species 1, and I'll explain that on the next slide here and what that means. So the idea is that those 40 points are required, and the students kind of can pick and choose the other points that they need to get to 100. They had to pick 100 points out of this, and if you add this up, you'll find that there's a lot more than 100 points possible. So if they did 3 species and they did both equations for all 3 species, automatically right there, you're talking about 30 points for this species, 20 points for the first set of equations, and then another 20 points for the second and third set of equations. And you're already at 30 plus 40 points, which is 70 points. So they're already in a pretty good spot from a grade perspective if they did nothing other than that. And then they do the other two required parts of this project, which are math oriented, right? And they're already up to 90 points. One of the things I got from students from time to time on this particular project is there's not any math in this project. I actually had a student complain about that once. He said, there's not any math in this project. This is just nothing more than just a bunch of art stuff. And I sat down and talked with that student about that and talked through them with where the math really was in this project. And what was interesting is they simultaneously said, yeah, okay, I see that, but I disagree. And I'm not really sure what their major complaint was other than the fact I was requiring them to do work. And that was one of the things that one of the questions I always get, or one of the pushbacks I always get from students, is that this was a lot of work. It's like, yes, it was. You're welcome. And that is literally my response normally is yes, it was a lot of work. You're welcome. Welcome to learning how to work and persevere, which are mathematical, and that's true about any subject, is they are things that you want students to be able to do, is persevere and work hard through things. So the critical mass piece and the time prediction to extinction, this is something that was kind of interesting. This is real world applicable, is this idea, and I gathered this from the science teacher that I was working with, is that anytime you have a new species introduced into a new ecosystem, it is going to do one of two things. It's going to die out extremely quickly, or it's going to overwhelm the environment. One of the two. It's going to destroy the environment, or it's going to die out. There's really nothing in between. You don't ever really have. Sometimes there's these rare instances where you have this species that integrates in with a new environment and it doesn't really damage the environment. It just kind of alters it a little bit. But by and large, anytime you have a new species introduced into an environment, it destroys the environment, or that species can't survive in the environment and it dies away. And there's nothing else that's in between those two pieces. So this idea of critical mass and max population is the population is going to grow fairly quickly to a critical mass, which is the largest sustainable population. And then it's going to double in size, which is its maximum population, roughly double. And then it's going to die away. It's going to go off to extinction extremely fast. And the math behind it works out extremely well. It is documented amongst lots of different species, and it's been seen multiple times in different ecosystems. So that's kind of the premise behind those pieces. And then if you look in the middle column and the second row from the bottom, it says something awesome. One of the things I discovered in my projects early on is some students go above and beyond anything that's actually required on the project. They do such a level of detail, excellence. The artwork is so amazing, the creativity is so amazing, that I felt like I needed to honor that input from them, that hard work from them, by giving them 10 points. And a lot of times what that meant, it was an additional 10 points of bonus. And I told them on the front end, this is what it looks like. All right, so I give them these backgrounds. This is true with every project I do, is I give them some background on some of the things that I'm looking for them to do. In this particular one, I actually give them the equations. Notice there are two equations. There's the growth equation, which is the one with the base E, and then there's the decay equation, which is the ln equation. And actually, no, pardon me, strike that. Those are both different, the growth equations there. And when a population grows exponentially, it's going to grow without bound, and it's going to explode in size. And then you have the logarithmic growth, which means it kind of tops out. It grows really, really fast to a spot, and then it just kind of flattens out. And it continues to grow, but it grows at a very, very slow pace. And that's kind of the growth model you want from a population, is you want it to kind of be able to grow really fast, recover from a disease, recover from an illness, a famine, whatever, and then flat out, just kind of flatten out a little bit. So I go through the different ideas with this, with the students. I tell them, I explain critical mass or carrying capacity. It started off as critical mass because that was the wording, the verbiage that was used in science, and at some point it switched over to carrying capacity or the sustainable size. So those are the words I continue to use in the exercise or the project with the students. And I went through and talked about, how could you save the population? How could you save the species? How could you save the ecosystem? Those different things. And then I ran through an example with the students, right? So I actually built an entire example with the students, and you can see that with this, I created the equation, and then the time to critical mass was 10.55 days is how I was measuring this. So the population starts off at 20, and the way it grows in about 11 days, it's already reached its critical mass. And then just a couple of days after that, it has reached its maximum population. And then 7 days after it starts to decay, the population is dead, completely dead. So it's a very quick growing whatever this thing was. And I think this particular population, I forget what I called it, but it ate red sneakers. And that was just something weird to get the students' attention. So going back to the rubric, when you design these rubrics, these points are all or nothing. This is the way I did all my high school projects. The points were all or nothing. And I would do daily check-ins with the students, as many students as I could on a daily basis. So I'd start with saying, what are your species? What are the creatures are you dealing with? Where's the data? How are you making them grow? What does that look like? Where is this next piece? And I'd give them benchmarks of where they should be on a regular basis. You should be at this point on this day. You should be at this point on this day. And I put that on the boards, like by the end of today, by tomorrow, you come in here tomorrow, you should be at this point. You should have this many points, or you should have these items done off of the rubric. Depending on which project we did. And we'd run through that. So I'd give them a couple weeks and do daily check-ins with them. And that daily check-in piece was, and this is one of the really powerful aspects of a project. If you just give students a project, you don't talk about it for a while, and then you come back to it after you're done. With young learners especially, what's going to happen with that process is you're not really going to be gathering a whole lot of information. They're not really going to be learning a whole lot of stuff. It's just one more thing for them to do. Here, the project is acting as a media to foster the interaction between the teacher and the student in such a way that they can gather understanding about each other, right? So there were students who said after doing some of my projects that it was the most fun or the greatest amount of learning they've ever had in a math class. And some of that is revolved around the idea is what it was a lot of personal interaction. It changed the way I had to conduct my class. So I would do a mini lesson, I'd give them time to work on their project, we'd do a mini lesson, we'd work on the project, and the project was the classwork, was the homework. I designed it in such a way so that could be done. Now there were other activities and other practices that they had to do that went along with this, but they were all, and this is how I framed it for the students, was they were all around the idea of building them to be able to complete the project effectively. All right. So they did this classroom assignment or these problems out of the text for the purpose of being able to understand how to do the project better. And that really kind of helped them quite a bit in understanding and moving back and forth and why I'm doing these projects. Oh, okay, I see how these fit together. It was a linkage piece that helped them move them through the material more efficiently and gave the material purpose. I hope that this process is useful. This is not even a 20-minute discussion about something I normally spend half a day discussing with people when I've developed projects. If you have other questions or comments about this, feel free to reach out, leave a comment, and I'll see what I can do about addressing that. Or shoot me an email if you have access to that. You can even build a project and send it to me, and I'll be happy to give you some feedback. If you're in one of my classes, more than likely you're having to build a project as part of an assignment. Anyway, take care and project on, all right?